Give me one second. All right, here we go. Hello, everyone watching online or watching the recording. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 6th webinars in our summer webinar series. Today I have Sam Kingma and Stephanie Ott. Is it Stephanie Ott or Audie?
Odie.
Odie. It's neither. Odie. Isn't Odie the dog in Garfield?
That's exactly what I say to everyone all the
time. Okay. So I'm really happy to have these two very knowledgeable ladies with me today. Sam is a licensed marriage and family therapist who graduated from Fuller, Pasadena. She has spent time working with little kids and with teenagers and is now working with students at ASU. So she has run the gamut of teen and littles. She has level 1 sand tray certification and is EMDR trained for kids. So she'll be answering a lot of those questions for us. She also has extensive trauma therapy training in other areas. She's married to a student ministries pastor at Phoenix Presbyterian?
Valley Presbyterian Church in Scottsdale, but close, yeah.
And Stephanie is a fully licensed professional counselor, LPC, and she specializes mostly with teens who have experienced trauma and anxiety and depression, which oftentimes accompanies that. And she is also EMDR trained. She uses internal family systems and DBT as well in her practice. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you are watching and you have any questions, I know many of you left questions on our social media channels for me to include, and I have included those questions in our interview. But if anything pops up in your mind, I'm wondering about that, there is a Q&A button on your screen. Go ahead and click on that. And at the end of our time together, if we have time, we will address those here. Otherwise, I'll pass them on to Sam and Stephanie, and we can answer those on social media later. So Sam, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start talking about littles and we're going to move up through teens. Why don't you kick us off and give us a brief description of play therapy and how it works?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think play therapy often feels too simple to be real, too simple to be helpful, but it really is just play. But it's bigger than that in the sense that that is the language of kiddos. So kiddos speak the language of play. They don't necessarily think in the same type of words or languages that we use, mostly because their brain hasn't fully grown and developed to a place where they're able to do that yet. So sometimes we are asking them to communicate with us verbally in ways that their brain won't allow them to quite do yet. And so play therapy is getting down on their level, being willing to speak their language, and therapists are trained to be able to do that with kiddos. So a simple way to think about it is we've all had that day where we're trying to recall a word and we can't recall that word. So it's really frustrating. You go to bed thinking about it that night, multiply that by 20. That's a kiddo's experience of trying to communicate with us when we're asking them hard questions about their emotions. They don't know how to do it.
Yeah. So true. So what would happen if you tried to sit down and actually just talk to a kid? Sit them on the couch like you do adults.
Yeah. So it's some kids can do it. If your kid can do that, that's amazing. Some kids are very gifted in verbal language skills. However, the majority of kiddos cannot. Most of the time they'll shut down, they'll get quiet, they'll get really goofy, they'll roll around on the floor. What they can do really well though, is they can tell us stories through their play. They can tell us their emotions through their play. And what we see in play therapy are themes. We really focus a lot on themes. There's different types of play therapy, but we pay attention to how do the characters interact? What theme or what moral is this child trying to communicate to us through the stories that they're playing out? And that is really powerful and really meaningful and shares something with us about what that kiddo's processing.
Right. Can you give us, and I didn't prep you for this part, but can you give us a practical example of how that might look? So you're doing sand tray with a child. Mm-hmm. What might happen in that interaction that would let you see inside the child's communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the biggest themes that comes up is either containment, as we call it in therapy, or lack of containment. And so a child may create a sand tray with fences everywhere, just things divided, and put different animals or characters in between each fence. And so we may find that those barriers are creating sort of a safe place for each of the characters in which we realize, oh, this kiddo is telling us something about how they feel safest. Or we may find that those barriers are actually separating each of the characters, each of the animals, each of the items, and keeping those items or animals from actually being able to relate to one another or communicate with one another, thus telling us maybe this kiddo is wanting to reach out and feels like there's barriers, or maybe this kiddo isn't sure of how to communicate or just feels really separated from people that they don't want to feel separated from. So what I like to tell parents is it's not a one-to-one. What happens in the sand tray isn't a direct example of what's happening in real life, but it gives us sort of like an idea, a concept, a meaning of how a child is perceiving their world.
Right. So they're playing out their understanding of how the world, universe, their world looks in play.
Correct.
Right. How can you tell, this is a social media question, how can you tell if the counseling your child is receiving is effective? How can you tell if it's time to seek a different counselor or type of counseling? How can you tell if your child is ready to be done with counseling, either permanently or temporarily?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's actually one I talk to a lot of friends and family in my personal life about, because I think it's a question everyone has. So if you're asking that, you're not alone. But I think what it really comes down to is gut instinct. So we see empirically that the majority of therapy progress is based on your relationship with your therapist. So that's you as the parent, or that's your child and their relationship with the therapist. That would be both. So if you don't trust your therapist, if you don't like your therapist, if you don't like being around them, if you don't want to go see them, if you dread it, if you feel like they don't get you or connect with you, it may be time to seek a new therapist. Not because that therapist is bad or not good at doing therapy, but maybe it's just not the right fit. And in order for there to be progress, there has to be some level of connection.
Right, right. I like that you said a gut instinct. I think parents are often told to ignore their gut.
Yeah.
And as therapists, I think we'd all say, no, pay attention to that. Actually, be curious about that. So I like you started with that.
And my hope would be that most therapists would be open to hearing, hey, I don't think this is a good fit, and could help you then find a therapist who would be a good fit, because we know not every therapist is going to fit with every client.
Right, right. And I think both of you would agree. I agree, since it's my people, I'm saying it, that if the client is feeling it, we probably feel it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when would you recommend someone bring their adolescent or child to therapy, perhaps include some symptomology here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think if you're asking that question, maybe it's a good time to check out therapy. Just purely the fact that we're asking, should I get therapy? And I really want to dispel the myth that therapy means something's wrong with you, or therapy means something is wrong with you as a parent, or you're not a good parent, or something's wrong with your kid. That's just simply not what therapy means. Therapy is a place for humans, people, to go talk about their emotions, their experiences, and hopefully as families learn to connect with one another better. And so it's not a life sentence of, a crazy diagnosis or something horrible that it means about you. So if you're wondering, maybe therapy could be for me, check it out. It might be a really good time for that. And therapy tends to be best when it is proactive. Not that it can't help after there are intense symptoms. It certainly can, but the sooner the better.
Right.
Yeah.
Stephanie, you also had some feedback for our social media questions here. How do you know when your child needs professional counseling? And what do you think if your child, what do you do if your child, let's try that again. What do you do if you think your child needs help, but they don't, and they're a teenager, so they're already difficult to move, right? The immovable force.
Is that a good question for me?
That's for you, yeah.
Yes, this is a good one. Honestly, if your child doesn't want to engage in therapy, but you think it might be helpful, coming from a family perspective could be a really great intro. Let's go try this together. A lot of times there can be kind of something in the environment, in the family environment, can be worked on that is kind of being shown more in the adolescent, is more prevalently seen in the adolescent. And so coming at it from a family perspective can be super helpful. Sometimes I'll find that parents will come in saying, this is wrong with our adolescent, we're concerned about this, and then it shifts into about really family communication. And that can be a really helpful, beautiful time, especially for teens who just really, it's like the time of their life where they really want to be heard and understood, and they struggle with that. So family therapy can be a really good way to kind of be an intro into that for the more resistant teen who's not super interested.
Right. And I think even it shows some humility that teens want to see in their parents, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to go so that I can learn how to be a better mom to you. And I would really love it if you went because you're the one that has the most information about what you need, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that. So should parents who take their kids to therapy be surprised, Stephanie, if the therapist recommends family work? So I'm bringing my kid to you and I say, they're doing all of these things, fix them. And you're going to say to me,
Uh, yeah, I would definitely don't be surprised because like working with children in general can be very systems oriented. Sometimes adolescents and teens want that individual time because they are at the developmental stage where they're individuating. They're kind of becoming their own person. They're spending more time with friends rather than with family. They're
right.
starting to dive out a little bit more, but still kind of having those moments like if it's really a communication kind of issue, that can be something that's super prevalent. Is so helpful for teenagers if that is something that they're interested. Other times I really get those teens that are like, don't you dare let my parents come in here. They just want that to be their own time. But then I honestly, I have the exact opposite too, where the teens don't necessarily want to be one-on-one with me. They just want more clear communication or understanding between themselves and their parents. And that's so helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to try to speak up. I got some feedback here from one of you that I'm hard to hear. I'm losing my voice, so I will
Oh
try to
no.
very clearly. Sam, you also, when we talked about this, said basically the same thing Stephanie said. Did you have anything
Mhm.
to add to that question?
I think that was just really well said. I think we may get into this. I don't know with another question, but I think one of the most important things to say is that therapy is 1 hour a week at most, maybe 2 hours a week for a little while for some people, but um, at most it's 1 hour a week that that child or that adolescent is spending with the therapist, and the rest of the time they're at home with you. And so, as a therapist, our goal is not to bond with the therapist or with the child or with the adolescent and make sure that this is just a really good relationship here. Our goal is to make sure the relationship that that child or that adolescent is having with you, with their family, with their friends out in the world are successful. So for that reason, sometimes family therapy is the best way to do that.
Right. Agreed. Agreed. What would the first couple of sessions of therapy look like practically, Sam, for a 3 to 6 year old, and then maybe even for a 7 to 10 year old? And I know
Yeah.
those are different groups.
Yeah. So I can't give a, exact prognosis. Every therapist is going to run things a little different, but you're probably going to see a lot of play, especially the younger you go. There may be a point where you go, what are we doing? Seems like we could play like this at home and it would be less money. If you have that question, I really encourage you to ask your therapist that. What are we doing? What are you seeing? What are you looking for? Because I don't understand what's happening. And your therapist should be able to fill you in on exactly what's going on. But the thing is there's going to need to, number one, be a lot of play if it's play therapy. But number two, there's going to need to be some trust between your child and that therapist. Even though that therapist's role is to help your child trust you more, and to help you be more of a trustworthy parent for your child, that therapist is still going to need a little bit of what we call rapport with that kiddo in order to work well with you and your family. And so with adults, we may be able to build rapport in a session or two. With kiddos, it sometimes takes a little longer, and every child is going to be different. And so those first few sessions may look like a lot of play, not a lot of questions, not a lot of getting to the heart of the issue. But if you have questions about that, I would really encourage you to call your therapist after the session or pull them aside and say, hey, can you fill me in on your thought process here? Because you certainly don't want to be in the dark as the parent.
Right. And then Stephanie, how about for you and your adolescence? What does it look like for you when you're, the first few sessions? Because I think some parents might be hesitant to like, how can I prepare my kid, to tell them what are they going to do? Because every kid's like, well, what's going to happen when we go in there,
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to revoice what Sam said is that every therapist is a little bit different in their style of how they do it. So I can really just speak to how I do it. but I usually bring in parents and teen and for the first session, and I kind of do the history taking, the what has life been like up to this point, what's been difficult throughout the lifespan, what's happening more recently that's bringing you in, what's the relationships at home like, asking a lot of initial questions to just help me get to know the family, help me get to know the client, and help me get to know what's going on and how the client is kind of handling life and what's the big kind of issues. Other times it's super rapport building. It can be just tell me a little bit about yourself, and it depends on where that teen is feeling emotionally about the process. For some teens, they're ready to dive in and they're ready to tell you exactly what's been going on and what they want to have see be different. But with other teens, they are maybe a little bit more nervous or a little bit more hesitant, and that can be a lot more rapport building of just like, hey, we don't even have to do anything serious today. Tell me a little bit about you. What do you like? Do you like video games? Do you like sports? I don't know. Tell me a little bit more about you. Show me your favorite music. What artist are you into right now?
Yeah.
So really just kind of connecting piece is really important. But otherwise, I tend to do that history taking. And then in later sessions, I try to have it be about my second session. I do what's called treatment planning. And so that just means that I'll talk to parents and to the teen about what goals they want to accomplish in counseling and in therapy in general, what they want to have see be different, what they are experiencing now and how they'd like to change. And we kind of collaboratively make this plan together. And then we all sign it together, and we just kind of, after that, we move on to just the normal sessions of whatever the family's looking for, whether that's individual or family or a little bit of a mixture of both.
Yeah, good, thank you. So I think you answered this. One of my follow-up questions was, and you answered it, does it depend on age or personality? And I think you said personality. It doesn't really hinge on age, really, if they're going to be more shy or less shy or want more time alone.
Yeah. And I think one thing I would also say about that, Stephanie, you got me thinking as you were talking, which I completely agree with what you said as well. And I think one thing to remember as parents is, if you start thinking about going to therapy on day A, and then you're thinking about it for a month, and then you maybe start doing research, and then you research for another month, and then you find someone and you schedule an appointment, and that's 2 weeks out. So you've been thinking about therapy for 2.5 months, and then your kiddo is told maybe the day before, the week before, we're going to therapy. They're going to need some adjustment time to what that means for them. And you've had a lot of time to just kind of mentally think about, what are we going to talk about and how is this going to go? Sometimes kids don't have as much time because we bring them, we're the adults in their life. So it's just important to give them some time to adjust. They may not open up the first few sessions. It's very normal.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean,
too, something that I do see trending a little bit more is my teens asking for therapy. Being the one that's saying, hey, I've heard this can be helpful. I have some friends who've done it. If your kid's asking for it, yes, pursue it.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah, I read somewhere that this is the generation that are teens now are going to be called the therapy generation. So, which is, I mean, it can't be bad, right? I think maybe it'll resolve some global issues. I know one of the first questions I get from clients when I'm meeting with clients is, how long is this going to take? So can you think to the length of time, both of you? And I know that this is not really an easy question to answer. So go ahead and just tell us what you would tell a parent if they ask that question. Stephanie, you go ahead and start.
Okay, I will start. I usually go like, I don't know. If I have someone who's coming specifically for trauma treatment and we know that we want to do EMDR, it's very kind of specifically part of what the plan is. I will talk a little bit about how the EMDR protocol is normally about 20 sessions. I'll talk a little bit about what's entailed in the protocol, but then I'll also be like, everyone is so different. Some people take less than 20 sessions. Some people take more than 20 sessions. It just really depends on what your history is like, how you react to it. It's all very dependent.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I do with treatment planning, we usually do like a 6-month checkup. So that can be kind of a nice span to talk about too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a perfect description. I think that's well said. And I think therapy is going to look, like Stephanie said, really different if you're going in for trauma treatment, if you're going in for, we're having some family conflict and we just kind of want to work that out, or We're not really sure what's going on. We're not sure if it's trauma. Or sometimes we have trauma in our life that's creating symptoms and we're not ready to process it. We just want to kind of be able to move to the next stage of life, and we'll process it at a different time, or maybe we don't need to. So I like to say 8 to 10 sessions is a really good mark for you to give yourself, where you can go, I'm not going to evaluate whether I want to keep doing this until I hit 8 to 10 sessions. If you're going weekly, that's about 2.5 months. That gives you the chance to see some change in your life. Now, granted, it may get a little worse before it gets better, because when we change things, that can be really hard, even if they're good changes in the long run. So prepare for that. But I would say at least 8 to 10 sessions, because sometimes we go in going, okay, well, I'll just need 2 sessions and it'll be good. And the therapist is still building rapport with the kiddo at 2 sessions. And as a parent, you're like, oh, this is not what I thought this was. So maybe give yourself that as a benchmark where you can kind of reassess what you're looking for and chat with your therapist about reviewing your goals if y'all haven't already.
And it's really helpful to discuss your concerns with the therapist. Like, here's what I'm wondering about. Here's what I'm concerned about. Because then it's not like the therapist has to mind read. They kind of know exactly what's going on with you.
Yeah. And just so everyone knows, we don't get trained in mind reading in school. That's not a class we take as therapists. Like, there's no trainings on how to read minds. So it's not possible.
I don't know where you guys went to school. I for sure got so one of the essential pieces of the philosophy of mending the soul is that abuse happens in relationship, and healing needs to take place in relationship as well. And so as a child therapist or as a teen therapist, relationship building is key to the success of your therapeutic process. You talked to Sam about the empirical evidence that we have that I think it's like 90% of the success rate of your therapy is related to the relationship.
It's really high. Yeah.
Your therapist. So it doesn't, if somebody tells you have to do this modality, no, you don't. It really is dependent on your therapist and your relationship with them. But talk a little bit about that and how you live that out in your practice. Sam, why don't you start us off, and Stephanie, you can finish us with teens.
Yeah. Can Stephanie start out on this one? I want to hear what Stephanie has to say before I go. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right, repeat the question for me one more time.
So what we're looking for here is, talk to me about the relationship building that takes place between you and the teen, and I'll tell you the reason for this question. A lot of times I think parents are concerned that their kid is going to go into therapy and they're going to talk about them.
Right. Yes.
Trouble, cool. Right. So if I bring my kid to you and they tell you I'm a horrible person, am I going to get reported to DES? Are you going to think I'm a bad parent? Are people going to think I'm a bad person? I don't want to end up being the one to blame here. So you're building a relationship with my kid. Talk to me about that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, I can go. Sorry, I was painting it off on you, Stephanie, because I was like, oh, I got it. Which direction are we going? But I can start if you want me to.
Yeah,
go for it.
Okay, so yeah, one of the things that we talked about when we were kind of going over what we wanted to discuss for this was just the specific things. I think it's important for parents to know the specific sort of trigger statements or trigger words that would legally require a therapist to report a parent or a family. Because I do think that's one of the big reasons that families don't seek help when they need it. It's very normal to need help. I think all of us need it. But there's this big fear component. Am I going to lose control? Am I going to lose my kids? Am I going to lose everything I have? Which is very reasonable. So every therapist is what's called a mandated reporter. And what we're mandated to report is physical abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. And so what physical abuse looks like is hitting your kiddo with anything other than an open hand on the buttocks. So if you're spanking your kid with an open hand on the buttocks and you're not leaving a mark, that is not considered child abuse in the state of Arizona. I can't speak to other states, but in the state of Arizona, that's what is considered okay for spanking. However, if you're using an object, if you're using a closed fist, or if you're hitting your kiddo any other place on their body, or if you're leaving a mark when you spank, those things could potentially be reportable. Let's see, sexual assault or sexual abuse is going to need to be reported. So that's any type of sexual contact with a kiddo at all. And then neglect would be if a kiddo doesn't have access to daily food or meals, or if a kiddo doesn't have a safe place to sleep. at night, or if a kiddo is dirty to a point where they're, not bathing regularly, they could be becoming ill or becoming sick. So those things would be reportable. Outside of that, self-harm. So Stephanie can probably talk a little bit more about that, but if a kiddo's talking about wanting to hurt themselves or hurt someone else, that is going to open up a larger discussion as well. However, it doesn't necessarily get reported in the same way. It just more is that we have to be able to help that kiddo. However, I do think it's important to emphasize, just because one of those things is happening or a therapist finds out about it doesn't mean that, you're kind of pushed to the side as a parent, because the mentality right now is really to work with families to help healing happen and collaboration happen. And so the therapist's goal is healing and help for your family. But if you're nervous about those things, you don't have to talk about them. You don't have to bring them up in therapy. You have the power to share what you want to share. And then I always encourage parents to do check-ins with therapists. Like, what are y'all talking about? I encourage parents to be a part of sessions if they'd like to be, and ask their therapist how they can do that, so that it demystifies that sort of kiddo therapist time together. Because really we're just talking about how to help families get along better.
Right. I want to do one area of clarification on the
Please.
Sexual abuse also includes exposure to sexual material.
Thank you.
So if you have pornography in your home, if your kids could be exposed to anything like that, you should be aware that that is a reportable thing, because it is highly damaging to our kids and their little brains. So not that we're in the business of reporting parents to get them in trouble, but if you're watching this, you should be very aware that that is considered a crime to have it where it is accessible to kids, or to expose your kids to it intentionally.
Thank you for that. Yes, you're correct.
Stephanie, how about you with teens?
In terms of rapport building and like parents kind of having maybe some concerns or some questions about it, this really kind of goes back to, again, depending on the type of what the kid kind of wants for therapy, because with teens, there's a lot more concern where teens will be like, "You're not going to tell my parents, are you?" And the way that I kind of introduced that in the system at the beginning is, I talk about exactly what Sam talked about in terms of like, these are the issues. This is when I can't guarantee that things are just going to stay between you and me. Is if there's any sort of hurt, harm, or abuse at all. If there's ever anything that's kind of in the gray, like kind of just like normal teen exploring. And I do have concerns that I would like to talk to the parents about it. I kind of frame it in the way where I'm going to talk to you, the client, about how we're going to talk to parents about this. Right. Not that I'm going to go behind your back and talk in secret with your parents. It's we're going to try and have this communication all together. And I like it when it's the same way with parents. I don't love it whenever it's a parent secretly communicating to me. Mm-hmm. I like it when it can be, let's talk about this all together. So that is really the stance that I kind of come into whenever it's, there might be some concerns about, what are you saying? What are they saying? Right. But also there is just good, there's importance in being able to just, I like to describe it as, get your yuckies out. Mm-hmm. A space where you can share some maybe not so friendly feelings you have about family. Mm-hmm. And have that be in just a safe place where you can start to move through it versus staying stuck in it. And so therapy really provides a place where you can get out all the feelings about parents. And honestly, I have the exact same thing with parents sometimes, where they can get out their feelings one-on-one with me. Yeah. And that's a safe place to do it versus necessarily doing it with each other and possibly having some damage in that relationship because of the yucky feelings that were coming out.
I think too, it occurred to me as you two were talking, I think sometimes there's this perception of what a therapist does. And the reality is we hear some pretty horrific things. And I think people are sometimes thinking they're going to shock us. And there's probably nothing your kid can say that we haven't heard. And we aren't looking to blame anybody. I know you said this a little bit, Sam. We're looking to heal the family. All of us want happy families, because happy families make happy kids, and happy kids make happy marriages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think most of the training I've heard is our job is to work ourselves out of a job, not to create more problems. So I think if you're going to a therapist, that your perception, your feeling, that gut instinct is saying, I feel like they're working against me, that's probably not a good fit, because they should be helping you to be a better parent to your child and to process anything that is standing in the way of that. And that brings me to the next question, which is, I sometimes think that parents, and I know this has been true for me, I have 4 kids, we don't realize how much of our own frustration, our own baggage, our own triggering in regards to our children, the stuff we bring into our day, impacts their emotions. And it's actually about us and our inability to self-regulate. Can you speak to how parents might be able to become more aware of their own regulation, and how kids tend to mirror a parent's regulation, or at least respond to it? And I'm going to start with Sam for the littles, and then Stephanie, you can answer for the bigger kiddos.
Yeah, so this is like the best news in the world, really, because you don't have to have all the parenting skills, because your kiddos are going to learn what they see you doing. They're going to do that. How cool is that? You don't have to give them the 1, 2, 3, here's our step-by-step how to be a person. They just pick it up from what they do, and you're their favorite person in the world. And so what a better person to learn from than you?
And then
the bad news
oh God, I do that.
Yeah, the bad news is that you see yourself and your kiddo and go, oh, no. Yeah, that's the hard news, is that they're seeing things we don't even see in ourselves, and they're picking those things up and they're emulating them and they're doing them. And oftentimes as parents, that's what we see when we go, no, don't do that. We are doing those same things as adults. So modeling is the primary way that kiddos learn, and they are going to observe the people they love most and they trust most in the world, which is you, their parents. So yeah, I think that regulation piece is really the key to parenting. You can pick a variety of different parenting approaches, and all of them can be right and good. You know, 10 different people can parent differently and have amazing kiddos. But if you aren't self-regulating your emotions, which is what we call, calming yourself down, staying in control of yourself, not having emotions, but staying in control of how your emotions are expressed outwardly, keeping a calm voice, choosing to not yell, choosing to have really heated discussions with your partner or your spouse away from kiddos' earshot. If you're able to choose to do those things, your kids will benefit. And I would say one of the things I see in therapy sometimes is kiddo comes in, parent comes in, we're having a family session. And as a therapist, I need to be able to empathize and hear out and understand the parent experience. This is hard as the parent. You love your kid. But as a kid, this kiddo also has their own experience and things are hard for them. And I want to hear that. And I want to validate that and go, wow, this is hard for you too. And sometimes I notice that when I'm really understanding a kiddo's perspective, wow, it's really hard for you when mom does X, Y, and Z. Not blaming mom, but it's hard for both of you. Mom or dad or whoever the parent is in that situation really struggles with sitting there quietly, hearing the therapist validate their kiddo's experience of being frustrated or being upset or sad about something that their parent might have done. And so I think it's really important for you to understand that in those moments, the therapist gets you. There's a very good chance the therapist gets you. You're a great parent. You're really trying, but they have to get the kiddo's buy-in, and they have to be able to connect with the kiddo and empathize with the kiddo in that space too. So just important to try to calm yourself when the therapist is doing that, and know the therapist is working to understand everybody's experience, and that's how you're going to communicate better. But as Steffi, you said, if you do feel like your therapist is against you again and again as the parent, definitely that is not the experience we're going for, and it's time to have a conversation.
Well, I would also say this, that I think, and I'm a mom, and so I'm around a lot of moms, and I think we have to be, you talked about regulation is not having feelings. If anything, I think regulation is being super aware of your feelings, because you have to be able to identify it to know what it is. And I think oftentimes the thing that is the most damaging in our parenting, and Stephanie, I think you and I talked about this, is fear and shame. And shame can really create a problem. Like I think Sam, you're talking about, why are you siding with my kid? a lot of that is shame. Like, that is hard. I know it's hard. And now everybody knows I'm doing it. And I feel like a horrible human. And so acknowledging what that is, and also none of us is going to get it perfect the first time, right? Like,
no.
second or third or fourth time. I think, my first kid was the easiest. It's the fourth one that I'm like, oh, I give up. So I think recognizing, regulating that, like, why am I having such a hard time with the situation with my strong-willed kid? Oh, because I'm strong-willed and I don't like that about myself. So how can I be aware of that? And also, I want my kid to love who they are. And that's where a therapist can really help, I think. How can I love something in my kid that I don't like in myself? That's hard. Stephanie, what about you with regulating in teens? Because we talked about in our pre-interview the fear that so many parents carry around about their teens and their teens' choices, and the teen brain is just so weird anyway. And so how do we help parents with that?
Yeah. So if we're doing family sessions, what I tend to do a lot is have the parent and the child practice reflective listening and validating. So basically that means that before we move on to the response, I want the person that was listening to summarize what the other person said and then validate it and say, I totally get why you feel that way. It doesn't mean that you agree with the response. It doesn't mean that you think that that was okay. It just means that you understand what the other person was feeling and going through. And so, and then you get to respond. So that is what I have them practice a lot in family sessions, because then honestly, I don't have to validate. They're already doing it for each other. They're practicing the skill that I want them to do at home. And that's so helpful for communication in general, not only in the current family system, but hopefully in your child's future family system. That they're really learning and getting modeled and experiencing in a super practical way what it's like to communicate in a healthy way that's super respectful and understanding of the other person mutually. In terms of outside, like sometimes when things get heated in family sessions, I will make this a very experiential moment and have it be like, I see things are heating up. Let's all take a deep breath together. And we practice the actual regulating time in the moment. So I can see in the way you're holding your body, in the way that your tone of voice is coming out, in the language that you're using, in all of these non-verbal ways that things are riling up and we need to calm it down. And then I go into and explaining what's happening in the brain whenever we're dysregulated. Whenever we're in our fight or flight mode, our brain is starting to shut off. Parts of our brain that are thinking about social cues, that are thinking about like problem solving or future oriented things, that part of your brain is going, we don't need this right now. We just need to survive. Shut it down. And so that it's really important to kind of wake that part of the brain back up by telling your body that it's okay. And so we'll practice those things in session. So having that be a look, everyone experiences this whenever we get riled up, we're going to practice calming down together.
Right. One of the books that I think we've all read and authors that we all love, all the three of us in this room, is The Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel. If you have little kids, it will help you immensely with this particular thing. There might be some things that are difficult for some parents who are very authoritarian to stomach, like allowing your child to ask for a compromise. But what this does is teach them critical thinking skills. It teaches them consequences. If they say, well, can I have a compromise? I'll put on my shoes, but I want to wear my sandals, not my snow boots. Sure. Guaranteed it'll be 10 minutes before they come in and get their snow boots. But they've made the choice, right? And so I think allowing yourself to experiment with things that might seem uncomfortable if you tend towards that. And I, full disclosure, totally do. If everybody would just listen to the way I want things done, we'd all be really happy. But it'd be difficult to take those steps as a parent that tends towards that. But I would recommend that if you are feeling like you're not parenting in the best way possible for you and your family, I would recommend that book. What is a common mistake, ladies, well-meaning though it may be, that you see parents make regarding their kids' emotional health? And Sam, we'll start with you. You mentioned Brene Brown, so that I can share.
Okay, I'm like, is that this question? Because because I was thinking all Brene last question, and I'm ready to talk about her. So if you're not familiar with Brene Brown, she has a Netflix special out now. I'm not paid to advertise for her. I just think she's amazing. So she's really easily accessible. Go check out her Netflix special, but she has a bunch of books. And one of the things that she does is she's a shame researcher, and she tells us that, her research tells us that the way we talk to other people is often representative of how we talk to ourselves. And so if we are, pretty down on our kids, we're pretty hard on our kids, we're getting really angry or really frustrated at our kids pretty easily, maybe we notice that in ourselves, there's a good chance that's how we're treating ourselves as well. And so I think it feels a little counterintuitive to many parents, but being compassionate to yourself as a parent, being gracious, being kind, being gentle, giving yourself a pass when you need a pass, giving yourself some rest when you need some rest. Those things are going to translate into how you parent. You are going to be more likely to be kind, gentle, loving, and caring towards your kiddo if you're able to do that for yourself. And I am here to tell you that it is very healthy to do that for yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to achieve less. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be as successful. In fact, it will probably ramp up your performance in many areas of life. And so the way we treat our kiddos is often indicative of how we think of ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's funny because I think with my kids, the things that they do, I'm like, oh, that's so awkward. Stop that. You know what I mean? And my own insecurity, I'm like, don't do that.
Yes.
Especially when they're playing with their friends. But we have to remember that's us, it's not them. And if we deal with our own stuff, it's a whole lot easier to let them have their own experience.
Yeah. I think driving is the perfect example of this to see it really clearly. I mean, when you're driving and you're in traffic and you're late, the way you're talking to other drivers or the way you're thinking toward other drivers may be an indication of how you're feeling or thinking towards yourself. Have I been there? Maybe. Recently? Maybe. But if I want to scream and yell at them, how unkind am I also treating myself?
Right. Stephanie, when you and I chatted, we talked about, this is where you really highlighted brain development and what's taking place for teens and how parents have difficulty transitioning. So why don't you go ahead and address that for us?
Yeah. So one well-meaning thing that I see with teens is parents trying to, honestly, I hear often like, I'm just trying to prepare you for the world. I'm just trying to make sure that you're a responsible adult. And that can turn into some micromanaging, that can turn into all kinds of things. But what can be tricky is transitioning from you were parenting a little and now you're parenting a teen, and that parenting style actually does need to be a little bit different. Because when the brain, what's happening in the brain for a little is a lot more, your black and white is a lot more, this is how the world is. And with teenhood, it's more like, is this how the world is? Let me challenge it.
I think you all lied to me. Yes.
Let me figure out what works for me, who I am, what's going on for me. It's a lot more of that self-discovery. It's a lot more of doing that individuating again, of going out into the world. We're practicing autonomy. We're practicing independence because we're practicing being an adult. But what can be really tricky with parents is that they will kind of teeter between treating you like the young one, treating you like the little, or treating you like the adult. And there's a nice middle. There is kind of like scaffolding, is you're not building it all by yourself and you're not letting them build it all by themselves. You're providing some structure, but you're also providing some freedom and some ability for them to start making decisions for themselves. Because that is adulthood, is starting to make decisions for yourself. And so something that I find can be really helpful in that time is curiosity, is being curious. That is a hard problem. What do you think you're going to do about it? Starting to treat the child like they are becoming their own expert in themselves, and being curious about what their kind of gut intuition is, what their first thoughts are about how they want to handle the situation. And then you can kind of talk with them through it a little bit more. You might have that fear parent response come up of like, no, don't do that.
I think it's interesting because I think between like 7 and 10, parents start to ask, well, what do you think you should do? What do you think you should do? And then I notice at like 16, 17, 18, when it's about time for kiddo to leave and we see that they're not quite ready, that we start to freak out and we're like, oh no, I did a horrible job. You're going to be a horrible human. But we forget we were there once too. And we thought we knew it all and we figured it out and we're still here. Right. And so I think confronting that fear of what is our greatest fear, and your therapist can help you with this. Like, what am I so afraid of that I'm unwilling to let them go and practice and speaking of driving, the first time you get behind the wheel, you've already read the book, right? You've passed the test to get in the car. You're still not going to be a great driver. And so it's kind of like that. We need to let them figure it out. But I think you're right. I think it's that scaffolding and paying attention to ourselves as parents that are we switching back to little kid mode because we're scared? Is there another way to maybe impart that knowledge that because sometimes maybe we did miss something, and we need to go back and.
Something that can also be tricky with teens is that I do see well-meaning parents trying to be like a boss role of like, this is, and I often hear this of like, well, this is what a boss would expect from you. This is what a future employer would expect from you. The reality is that you're not their boss and you're not their future employer. You're their parent. And so they're going to react to you way differently than how they would an authority figure outside of their home. And so I think that parents get a little bit nervous that like, they're in their home, they're in a relaxed environment where they can just kind of be themselves and rest. It might look a little bit lazier than how they might look on the outside with a different authority figure or in a place where they might have responsibility. So I would just take that with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that there's not issues like that, but just knowing that you're not that dual relationship. You're their parent. You're not their parent and their fake boss that they're practicing for in the future.
Right.
That is so well said, Stephanie. And I have seen that come up as well with younger kiddos too, even with middle schoolers. Well, one day when you're in the workforce, and I think they've got a long time until they get into the workforce. But also, would you want to come home after a long day at school to your boss? Because I would think that would be stressful for me. We all need some decompression time.
Right. I don't know. I'm trying to see. That reminded me of one of our other questions, I think. We'll get to it. Okay, so now we're going to move into EMDR because it was one of the things we told people we're going to talk about. So Sam, can you explain to us in layman's terms what the science behind EMDR is and what it is used to treat?
Yes. So EMDR utilizes what we call, quotes, bilateral stimulation. It sounds a lot more intense than it is. Basically, it simulates the back and forth eye movement that would occur during REM sleep. And if you're familiar with REM sleep, it is the stage of sleep where you would dream and where your brain is kind of decompressing and processing from that day, maybe more than that day. But that's where the dreams are. And that's one of the ways that your brain kind of really, truly rests is when you're in REM sleep. So it uses that, except instead of allowing your brain to just do it at whim while you're sleeping and to go to whatever memory it wants to, it's targeted to specific memories or moments or feelings or emotions that you would choose with your therapist or that your kiddo would choose with the therapist. And so it might look like eyes going back and forth. It might look like tapping on one side of the body to the other side of the body. But generally it's a way to help your brain create new, what we call neuro pathways, new ways of processing or thinking about difficult things that have happened to us. So I like to joke with my kiddo clients, I can't make you hypnotize. I don't hypnotize people. I can't make you dance around like a monkey. I can't make you forget all of this, and I can't read your mind. But what I can do is help you take something that feels really scary and really hard that's happened to you and make you realize how powerful and amazing you were at that time. And that really, as scary as it was, you're bigger and you're stronger and you're more powerful than what happened to you. So that's how your brain creates new neural pathways to help you get to that point during EMDR. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So we had talked about what can be treated with it. And we talked about in our discussions with both of you, big T and little T trauma. And I think people hear the word trauma, and I know people that have even experienced like rape, incest, go, I haven't had any trauma. So I try not to actually use that word. So maybe you guys can be a little bit more specific about big T, little T. Stephanie, you want to take that?
Yeah, big T trauma is tends to be more bigger incidents that honestly just tend to be a little bit more obvious or tend to be more intense. But this can be anything from like war to a car accident to just kind of anything that's jolted you. Little T trauma tends to be more minor, acute, and chronic. So it happened a lot, you barely noticed it, and it happened over and over and over and over and over again. And how I tend to see that, and Sam, you probably see it the same way, is that it just affects how you feel about yourself and how you feel about people and how you feel about the world. And usually in a negative way. And so some common things that come up that people can struggle with is like negative beliefs about yourself, like I'm not good enough, or I'm not safe, or I'm a bad person. It could be anything, to be honest. It's just how you're interpreting that difficult situation that you experienced. And then EMDR is going to help you get your brain to where it wants to be, to that healthy state. It's like your body likes to heal itself anyway. When you think about how you get a cut, your body wants to like heal itself, but it needs for any debris to be removed before it can successfully do that healing. And it's kind of the same way with the brain and trauma, is that the EMDR is kind of like removing that traumatic thing, that removing the splinter, if you will, so that your brain can kind of get to that natural healing that it already has for itself.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, having done EMDR, having had clients who've gotten it from other therapists, is that it's almost like this trauma gets stuck and is misfiled. And so it's messing up all the things that it's filed with, like how we view ourselves. If you're listening and you've done a lot of talk therapy, but still feel like you're not gaining traction in your own life, I would highly suggest you find someone who's really qualified with EMDR, because it can be transformative in refiling that trauma so that you are able to use those neural pathways in a better way. And I think too, something you said I was going to follow up on, especially for the little kids we're talking about whose trauma occurred before they were able to really cognitively process what was happening. When something negative happens to a little kid, they're not adults. So if somebody comes in my house and just breaks all my dishes and then leaves, I'm gonna be like, what is wrong with you, you weirdo, right? But if somebody comes into a little kid's house and does something to them, into their body, into their house, into their environment, they think it's about them. And so their brain is gonna create new cognitive beliefs about themselves in their life that don't make sense as adults, but they don't know it doesn't make sense. And so now they've run their life as an adult based off of these negative perceptions. And so that's why EMDR can be so helpful, because you might not even know why you believe that. It could just be that every time you talk to your dad, you left the room. And now all of a sudden you believe you're not worthy of being listened to. But you can't pinpoint what that is. EMDR will help you with that. And for little kids who have experienced trauma, we had a mom talk earlier in one of our series about a heart baby who had had 27 surgeries. And EMDR play therapy for her has enabled her to re-enter relationships, to get her teeth cleaned, to be able to go to the doctor without crying. And those aren't things she had words for. So to demystify this thing that seems voodoo-y, magic, UBG, weird, you're doing what? Why can't I just sleep? Just, know that we're all professionals. We're not weirdos. Like Sam said, we're not going to hypnotize you and make you dance on your head. It's actually, I think this is one of the most highly researched forms of therapy, isn't it? Like
there's a lot of empirical data supporting EMDR. And I think one of the reasons it's so exciting is that it's been around long enough to have empirical data supporting it, but it's still new enough that there are new ways of using it still coming on board. And so one of the ways or one of the areas that's biggest is with kiddos, because we're seeing all of this empirical data. We're going, oh my gosh, this is amazing for adults. Wait, we can use it with kids too. And so we're starting to combine it with play. We're combining it with sand tray. I've heard about it being used with kiddos as young as 2. Certainly if you have a 2-year-old, you would want to find someone who really knows what they're doing and specializes in working with 2-year-olds in EMDR. I'm not saying everyone does that, but it's really versatile and can be kind of morphed into your needs as a client.
Yeah, I do think that's a key point, Sam, is making sure, especially when it's our kids, that the person is certified, that they
Yes.
have hours of
Yes.
experience, that they're involved with
Yes.
EMDR, continuing ed, because you can do damage with EMDR. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Correct.
And you know what? We're kind of lucky in Arizona because there's a couple people here who have really developed the EMDR with kids a lot more. Dr. Robbie Adler Tapia is local, and she and Carolyn Settle co-wrote a book all about EMDR with children and how helpful it can be. And it's really awesome for us as Arizonans who can get trained by these people and really get to know more about how to do that and how to do that really well.
Right. We are coming up at the top of the hour. I want to check with you guys because we have our social media questions left, which is like 5 questions. Are you guys good for another 10, 15 minutes?
I have 5. Sorry.
Okay, so I'll ask your questions first. That's okay. Because Stephanie has the other ones anyway. You have 2 questions. Does play therapy cover or handle all the same topics that counseling does? We know abuse can happen very early. What's the earliest you would take a client into play therapy?
Yeah, I could see play therapy being useful as early as 3, though I would expect that parents would be highly involved at that point, just because a 3-year-old's really going to be primarily attached to their parents. However, if you're not sure if you're ready to take your kiddos, go on your own or go with your partner or spouse to the therapist and work on yourself, work on your relationship, and then ask your therapist, what do you think about bringing our kiddo into therapy as well? Just get some specific advice.
Yeah, and then this is a big one I get a lot from my friends. I get text messages. Is this normal? I get to know more about sexual curiosity in children. What's normal? What are red flags? And what steps do I take if I'm concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, again, if you're concerned, ask. If you're concerned, reach out to a therapist and ask. Certainly don't take my word as word for your specific situation. But I do think that there's going to be some level of sexual exploration of a child's own body for themselves. That's going to be very normal. They're trying to figure out who they are and what is going on. However, if you're noticing that your child is trying to look at other people's parts, if you are noticing your child is trying to put anything in their parts or wants to have contact with other people's private parts, those things are definitely going to be less typical child sexual development. Definitely a good time to seek out a therapist. Important to be aware that a therapist isn't going to automatically demonize you as a parent. If your child is doing these things, the therapist's job and goal is to be helpful to you so that your child can develop as typically and as healthily as possible. But those are definitely some red flags. If your child is kind of exploring porn or pornography, nudity online, definitely that's something to check in about because you don't want them to have access to those things that can really alter their development sexually. So definitely wanting to check those parent settings and then see, if there's more to the story there. Where did they learn about that? How did they find out about that? Am I missing anything, Steffi, that we had talked about?
No, not that you and I talked about, but you go ahead, Stephanie, because you have older.
What you were saying about porn too is that honestly with EMDR, it is common to process like your first exposure to porn or to something sexual, even if it was like not something super insidious, but it was like jolting for the child, which it can be depending on their age and their development. That is something you can process with EMDR, which is awesome.
Yeah. I think I just want to reiterate too, for parents that are watching, how important it is to be. I think that parents are really naive. We grew up, especially ones that are my age. I think you ladies are a little bit younger than me. But I didn't have a cell phone until I was out of college. So the concept of porn being able to come find me is foreign to a lot of parents, especially moms. So first, the average age of exposure has gone from 16 to 11 and is now 7 years old. And that exposure is usually technology. So a picture on someone's phone, being at a friend's house watching YouTube. This is just me, and I'm going to say this is not Mending the Soul, but your small children should not have access to YouTube because there are horrible people who will upload children's material and stick porn in the middle of it. So being aware that that does happen and that fixing it after is way harder than preventing it before. And being aware that it is, like you said, jolting and damaging, and it changes the way they view their own bodies and other people's bodies. It's just better to be more safe and less sorry. So the world we live in is not the world that we grew up in. If you are 40 or older. So just being aware of that, and that it's a very different world. Second graders with a phone are dangerous.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what could be bad and what could be good out there.
And
So
I think that's a great point, Steffi. And I see this a lot with parents, and I just want to empower you as parents. You have a right to use parental controls on your kid's phone. If your 8-year-old has a phone, please explore how to do that. If you don't know how to use parental controls, Google it, ask a friend, go to a therapist and ask a therapist, find an IT friend, but use your power as a parent to put parental controls in place. Your 8-year-old does not know what's okay and what's not okay unless you help them learn that. They don't come out of the womb knowing these things. So we do have to figure that out and then help guide them in that. And you have the power to do it.
Yeah. Stephanie, anything to add there?
That does change in adolescence.
Yeah, cheers to that.
Is that yes, it's exactly like that scaffolding thing that we were talking about earlier, is that when they're younger, you get to do this is the way. this is the structure, this is what we do. And then when we get into adolescence mode, we can't work off of that anymore. It becomes a totally different ball game, and it becomes a totally different conversation.
Yeah.
So take advantage of the time while you can, because you are training them. You are training them in what is typical, what is good, what they want to do, how they want to handle those things. But a lot of times parents will invert that scaffolding and go, oh, my 3-year-old will figure it out. And then when they're a teen, they're panicking, going, oh no, my teen's not prepared for the world. Let me tell them everything. So we definitely want to kind of switch that. So when they're 3, 4, 5, 6, there's a lot of control. And then like Stephanie said, it's less of that as they get older.
Yeah. Sam, if you need to step away, you can go ahead and do that.
I do. I'm so sorry. It's been such a joy though.
All right. Go. If everybody else wants to stick around for 10 more minutes, we're going to go ahead and ask a few more questions of Stephanie. And I just want to say, we'll probably cover this more in our How to Protect Your Kids from a Predator. But one of the things I did with my oldest, who was going to other people's houses for play dates, which is always scary because you can't ever be sure that somebody else doesn't have stuff in their house.
Yeah.
Is I said to him, someday somebody is going to have a picture on their phone or TV, and it will be of a naked person. And so when you see that, you're going to be curious and you might be scared. And I need you to walk away. And then I need you to tell me, even if you're really ashamed about it, because I want to be able to talk to you about what you saw, because you won't understand it. Yeah. And his response to me is, why would I need to take a picture of somebody without their clothes on? I'm like, good question. It's a very valid question, actually. But I think trusting our kids with enough information that we're not scaring them to death, but we're also being really honest. This is what you're going to see. This is how you're probably going to feel. Here's what you need to do. And then making sure they're comfortable with all of that, and that if they have any questions, we answer it. I think assuming nothing's going to happen is always the wrong way to go. Did you have anything to add to that, Stephanie?
I would say that, and this kind of, I guess, depends a little bit on the age group. Well, maybe it doesn't. But making sure that these conversations are normalized, making sure that they are shame-free, and even acknowledging that I love the way you did it. There might be some shame feelings that come up, but we can totally talk about it. And it's, you're creating that safe environment for your child to come to you later, like throughout the lifespan. Is the more that you have these conversations that are uncomfortable or hard, but you do it in a normalizing and healthy way, the better it's going to be later on. And you know what I've read about, it's not a sex talk, it's sex talks. And it's sex at the very basic level, depending on the age of, like, when it's really young, this is your body part. This is what other people's body parts are. When they get a little bit older, we don't touch other people there. And it's that is part of the sex talks, and you keep having those. But I think that it gets a little bit trickier whenever we get to preteen and teen level for parents to do it comfortably. And honestly, at that time, I would still do curiosity. It's not let me tell you what you're going to experience. It's tell me what this has been like for you, and let's journey through that together, versus the, like, we're kind of that more shaming of, like, we don't do this, blah, blah. And that more fear and some more difficulties that people have to process through later in life. So kind of coming from that of, like, what's been going on for you, let's talk about it, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, which if you need to get therapy for your stuff, do it. Don't pass it on to your kids. Okay, so these are actually really good questions for you from social media, Stephanie. How much does nutrition and or sleep habits play a part in the mental or emotional health of our teens? And what can parents do, especially if the teen is resistant or incapable of change?
Yes. Okay. So when you and I talked about this, it really is. Nutrition and sleep are so important. They are radically important in mood, particularly with teens. There's been some research about how you don't see stereotypical moody teen symptoms if they're getting like 9 or 10 hours of sleep. And I find that fascinating. That probably needs to be researched more. But you're probably not getting enough sleep as it is, and that's something that is so crucial. Nutrition as well, and this is something that I would try to get as young as possible, to be honest, because I will have people that will be like drinking like 44 gallons of soda every day, like that. Oh yes, thank you. Sorry. Yeah. 44 ounces of soda every day as a developing teen, like that is going to mess with your body. It just, and it's like normal levels, and just try how it's going to do with energy levels and what it's all very, very important. And so the more you can set that structure younger of like, we try to eat healthy, we try to limit. We want to be careful about like not doing shaming here. We want to be aware of the potential that if we control it too much, it can turn into some eating disorder stuff. So we want to tread lightly, but at the same time, we want to do this in a healthy way. And this goes back to that, like if you have issues with food and body and stuff, go seek that counseling, because it'll help you with kids, how they view food, how they view body as well. But it's so important. And in terms of how to address it with your teen, I would try to do it in a way where it's not like you need to do this, but it's more like let's talk about how this has been affecting you. You notice this, and you're going to get that pushback of like, no, I don't think it affects me at all. Well, just push through that one a little bit.
Maybe we could try it and see.
Yeah, exactly. But kind of collaborate with them. You're kind of deciding these things together and deciding what's going to be most healthy together.
Right. And I think you talked about the systemic issue of school, and if you just so you know, your kid staying up late and wanting to sleep till noon is actually the circadian rhythm of a teenager and their brain development. And so really, realistically, high school should start somewhere around 10 or 11 in the morning and go to like 4 o'clock in the afternoon rather than the way we have it. But we're not going to change that today. So I think just acknowledging to them that, instead of saying, well, I get up at 5, well, you're an adult and their brain is doing really big things. And so it is really hard for them. And then just modeling really healthy behavior. They're going to do what you do, even though you don't like the way it looks on them. So can you talk about the phenomenon of cutting? I think a lot of parents, this is seen in the media a lot, and a lot of parents are seeing it at home. How might we be able to help the caregiver, and how do this particular parent wanted to know, when do we know it's a problem?
Anytime there's self-harm of any kind, I would say go investigate it with a therapist, because even if it doesn't seem as intense, but it is still self-harm, that's a clue that something's going on with how they feel about themselves and how they're just processing things. So yeah, just go check it out. Any sort of self-harm, even if it's just like you're scratching, like investigate it. And you don't have to do it with this is a problem, we need to go solve this, because that might create some fear or some shame in the child as well. But more the like, hey, I'm a little bit concerned, like, let's go check this out. Let's go talk to someone who deals with this. And this can hopefully just be a safe place for you to talk about what's been going on for you. So self-harm, I would definitely say any sort of self-harm, just go find someone that they can talk to, and hopefully that stuff will come out a little bit more, and it might be really preventative. I'm not sure exactly what else you'd like me to cover.
That totally answers it. And I just want to say, for anybody watching, hair pulling was mentioned in this social media question, and hair pulling is actually more closely related to cutting than it is like OCD. I think people think OCD with hair pulling, and it really is about the pain associated with the hair coming out. It can also be associated with the feeling of the blood and the release and all of that. So hair pulling is actually very similar to cutting if you have a child doing that. This one is about little kids, but you can still answer it. This mom, the father passed when the kids were very young. They are too young to know that their dads are dead or missing from their life. At this point, I don't know that they don't have a dad. Do I start therapy and bring it up now or wait till they're older? And how do I keep from giving them an issue?
This is a complicated question.
It is.
It's very like, well, I need to know more information to help you out and give you like a really clear answer with this. Because I would be curious about what's going on for mom. I would be curious about how she's presenting. I would be, and sometimes therapy can be used as like a consultation or as like a safe place to have some family communication, just like a neutral space that parents can use to talk about things like this. I've seen people do it with kind of parents separating, with just major life transitions. Sometimes it can just be a neutral space to start to have some of these conversations and normalize it, versus kind of, is this a problem? And so I don't know if I have a really specific.
I think that's really helpful. I think that often I've had clients come in for one point where they're like, hey, here's the stuff. And I go, okay, well, what do you think about that? And they're like, oh, that is the way it is. Okay, well, if you have any other questions, come back. Just because you go once doesn't mean you're locked in. It's not like a gym membership. We're not going to make you sign up for 15 sessions. You know what I mean? So I think in situations like this where you're like, do I, when do I, what, and the therapist will tell you, watch for this and watch for this. And if you see this, that'll come on in. Okay, so one last question here, and then we had someone ask it in the group. Clues or ideas for early offense for responding to peer pressure. This is one that you and I talked about yesterday.
Yes. When we had kind of talked about it, it's there's some normalcy to peer pressure. Peer pressure can be good, it can be bad. This is when having these conversations with your kid just about, well, what do you think about this? Like helping them kind of develop that sense of self and how to stay true to sense of self is really helpful, versus like the simple, clear, just don't engage in peer pressure. You know, like that's a little bit too black and white. And talk to them a little bit. And you can even do that validating. I mean, I get it. This person's the most cool person. Of course you want to be accepted by them. That makes sense. It's really important to feel accepted and like you belong somewhere. And kind of do that, like validating the feeling first before we move on to the logic. That just tends to be super helpful with parenting in general. In terms of, it depends on like where you're at in this stage. If you are predicting negative things about like a couple life stages that you're not in yet, like if you're kind of dealing with some, like if you have little kids and you're worried about peer pressure when you're older, if you're worrying about a couple life phases before where you're at, that's just probably a signal of something that you might need to process through, and that would be really helpful for you. Because that might be that fear and anxiety of parenting in general coming up that would be good to process through, because it can really help to, when you get a good safe space to talk about that and process through that fully, it can make the actual parenting a little bit more simpler.
Yeah. And it occurred to me as you were talking to, it's much more beneficial to build in your child a sense of themselves, not of yourself, and a sense that they are capable of good decisions, rather than telling them what the good decision is, because then they're responding to your pressure. And if the goal is to give them a self perception that they can make good decisions and that their decisions are good, then you have to be very careful about, no, say this, no, say this. You want to give them the autonomy of being able to be themselves. And the fact of the matter is, you're not going to like everything your adult and teen children do. And you have to decide what you can be okay with and what you can't. But allowing them to be their best selves and not you is really important.
Another common mistake that I kind of see is that parents can be so, I'm afraid they're going to go down a bad path, that it can actually do harm in the opposite direction of like, now the kid's really anxious. And they don't trust themselves at all. And so then they're 24 and they don't trust any of their decisions because you told them not to. You make bad choices. Let me tell you what decision to make. And then we get frustrated that they're living in our basement still.
It's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. Okay, one last question. What if you're working with parents who are resistant to parenting skills, change for the good of the child? Any tips on helping parents without creating defensiveness? My guess is this is a therapist or someone who works with parents, a teacher.
Yeah, this is a really great question, and I don't know if Sam probably would have had a different response to this, because it is very different with teens. Honestly, sometimes if the parent's super resistant and the kid like does want individual time, I just work with them individually, because that's where they are at developmentally, and you can't make people change if they don't want to change. And then it becomes like working with the teen about like, how are you gonna deal with that? How are you gonna deal if this person doesn't change in your life? Because really you're going into adulthood, and if that person never ends up changing, they're gonna have to deal with that as an adult. So sometimes that can be something, it really depends. On just super depends. But other times, like I will have parents that will be defensive, but trying to kind of see and validate parents' perspective. And validation is like magic. It just like lowers the walls. It can, instead of like thinking about how to retort, they go, oh wait, you already retorted for me. I don't need to, okay.
Yeah. And I think too, it all comes back to the rapport, the relationship building. You have to have permission to speak into people's lives, no matter who you are and whether you're a therapist or a friend. And so creating situations where that person knows you're not about shaming, you're just trying to help. I have several girlfriends who we've built into the relationship permission to say, I saw this and I know you're really frustrated, but this is what it looked like from my perspective. So can I help you? Do you need me to pray with you? What can I do? And it's both ways, and it's a rare thing, but if you can develop that as a parent, I think it's huge to be able to say, hey, I know you're like, can I take your kids for the day? You seem stressed, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is. Or I heard you say this to your kid, and from, I felt the anxiety. So just having those kind of friendships as a parent is really important.
Oh gosh, community is super important. Like,
yeah.
I've seen a lot of damage when parents get too isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we feel like we're not doing a good job, that's what we do, is we cloister, right? And so I think that's when therapy is super beneficial. That's when it's essential to have community around you. So thank you so much for your time, Stephanie. If anybody is in Arizona and has questions or is looking for a child therapist, both Stephanie and Sam are in Arizona. Stephanie, can I tell where you're at?
Yeah. Tempe.
Stephanie is at Journeys Counseling Center in Tempe. If you would like to speak to her on a professional level, I'm sure she would welcome that. So thank you everybody for staying a little late, especially you, Stephanie. And we look forward to seeing you next week for our topic on spiritual abuse. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.